each packet individually.
You got enough square pans?
Well, I showed 9:30, so I guess we ought to start. I appreciate everyone that's here. Not a huge crowd, but didn't expect a huge crowd. There's a lot of folks in Adam's class and continuing on in that, so I expect them to do that. We may rearrange and have a little tighter setup next week so that we can just be a little closer. Do want to remind folks it's a discussion class, so be sure and jump in and make comments. We're going to talk about Christian evidences, and everyone should have a handout. A lot of this comes from a book on investigating Christian evidences, and it's by Bert Thompson and Brad Harrell. And it's a good book. It's a lot of detail. And you go, well, Sunday morning it's Bible study. Why are we spending a bunch of, this isn't, historically I'm teaching, it's like book, chapter, and verse to verse. It's kind of, in fact, that I kind of almost prefer that in a way. But this, we are told, and I am going to have verses as applicable as we work through it. On the first handout, we need a definition of faith, because there are folks, the main thing you're dealing with here is there are folks who are not Christians, who are atheists or whatever, who have opposing viewpoints, and they're just intent on, y'all are just blind faith. And the answer is, if you think about what the definition of faith is, Hebrews 11 verse 1 through 3 tells us, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. So here, this is like the perfect verse to start us off. We're going to talk about where did the world come from, the universe, and it was created by the word of God. But that first part, the first verse there, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Our friends who don't accept creation have to really have a lot more faith than we do, because they're, bottom line is no one was here to see when the universe was created. So you've got to have some convictions. You got to figure out, well, how do you think that happened? And so effectively, by definition, they have to have faith in Big Bang or evolution or all of these things. They may not want to admit that, but that's what it is. They're believing in something they didn't see. And we're believing in something we didn't see. Yeah, that's true. But we have the Bible, and obviously have the Bible to tell us what did happen back then. As in, God was there firsthand and no man was. We also need to think about studying some things that are not just strictly Bible and verse, because we need to be prepared to answer. And sometimes you may have someone who wants to study with you, and 1 Peter 3:15 tells us, but in your hearts honor Christ, the Lord is holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. And I think that verse in like a King James or a New King James is more about prepared, all ready to give an answer kind of thing. We also need to be ready to preach the word, be ready in season and out of season. We need to be ready. So that's kind of the gist of this. The class is going to be a mixture of, there's going to be some of God's word, wherever I can, it will be. It's going to talk about science a lot, math, engineering, just a bunch of different stuff. And the answer of why do you talk so much about science and some of the other stuff is that's basically the folks that are going to argue with you think that they're a scientist, or they think that they know scientific concepts, and that's where they're going to come from, and you need to be able to deal with that. I already mentioned the book that most of this comes from. Some of the concepts or topics I've listed there, we'll see how this works out. It's one of those I'm not sure how far we'll get in a given class period, so we'll see. We're going to talk about today the case for the existence of God. How did the universe come into existence? And then probably get into the second one, the universe's great designer. There's other topics we'll include. We're going to talk some about probabilities. There's a lesson on what's the chances an amino acid can happen, because folks that want evolution to be the case want to explain, this is, it just happens through time. You got enough time, things can happen. You got to have a lot of time because the probability is poor. We're going to talk about the human body's designer, God, the human body's designer. It's not a chance thing. We're going to discuss about evil, pain, and suffering. That's one of the topics that folks that don't want to believe want to basically bring up. Well, how can a good God let bad things happen to good people? That kind of concept. We are going to talk about the laws of physical laws, scientific laws, and thermodynamic laws somewhat. I didn't start with that, although you can't skip that. And we're going to have to mention it, but we're going to get into that in more detail. And hopefully we can explain that in a reasonable manner, not just a bunch of jargon that's over the heads of folks. And now I will note that I had 3 semesters of thermodynamics, so I forgot more about thermodynamics than than y'all want to know. Scientific foreknowledge in the Bible. There's a lot of science the Bible talked about way before, it was ever discovered. And then we should hopefully get to talking about Christians believing in creation and evolution. You believe in both. Dinosaurs, sort of the fossil record, and then different answers to the concepts people bring up about evolution. Any questions or comments before we jump in? Okay, page 2 of the handouts, and I'm going to try to do a handout. We don't have a good way really. I mean, we could do PowerPoint up there and do slides, but I thought a handout would give you something to take home and reference. Okay, so we're going to get into the case for the existence of God. How did the universe get here? Okay, it was a little bit before my time, but it's here, and we know that. So the first law we got to talk about is cause and effect, a physical law. So for something, and this is a basic law of nature. If the lights went out in here, the cause would be the power quit flowing to the lights. Now that could happen because I could go over to the light switch, and if I flip the light switch, I cause the light switch to go off. That will cause power to quit flowing through the circuit, and the effect is the lights are going to quit shining. Okay, without electrons flowing through them, they're not going to shine. Okay, a different cause could be someone hit a utility pole out here on the side of the road and causes the whole power to the building to be out and the lights go out. There could be different causes, but the effect would be if electricity quits going to the lights, they're going to quit shining. So we think about this law, and it's in everything we have. Folks, we are in kind of a blameful society, and folks want to blame someone when something happens. And it's not always about blaming someone, but there is a cause, and we may never know what causes it, but there is a cause for each effect. So what's that mean? How does that apply to us? Okay, and it applies when we think about the universe, there's three possible things that we can deal with about the universe. One is the universe is eternal. It's existed, it's been here for all time, and it's going to be here for all time. That would be a possibility, an option, or a theory. Another one theory that some of our friends would want to spend time on is the second one. The universe is not eternal. It created itself out of nothing. Okay, and then the third option is the universe is not eternal, and it was created by something superior to itself. So the first topic to ponder a little bit is the universe eternal? What caused the universe? Is it eternal? In the past, scientists wanted to focus on the first option because option 2, that it created it. We know option 3 is God created it. Okay. Option 2 has got problems. Option 1 has problems in that they know the universe is expanding. The universe had a point in time that it started. We also know another one of those laws that we're going to have to deal with is the law of thermodynamics about entropy. Okay, and we're going to get into that later, but everything runs down. Okay, so if you take this building and you built it and it was all nice and brand new, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, and then you got to do maintenance on it. There'll be a crack in the floor, there's going to be a problem with the sheetrock, or a piece of equipment's going to quit. Things deteriorate.
All we do is look at ourselves.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, you look at yourself, everything degrades with time. Okay, and that's people. That you can have an oak tree in your yard, and it might be 100 years old, but 200 years from now it's going to be gone. Buildings, cars, even smaller pieces of equipment. We got a new toaster recently. Toaster's pretty simple, but and that one was, I don't know, how old do you think it was?
The white one.
Yeah.
Our old one. Well, probably maybe 15 or 20 years.
15 or 20 years old, but it's not going to last forever. Some things will amaze you how long they do last, but things degrade. So the universe being eternal, when you look, and there's a paragraph here by Robert Jastrow, who has written, he's like the director of the Mount Wilson Observatory, and he's written a book, God and Astronomers. And he states, astronomers try not to be influenced by philosophical considerations. However, the idea of a universe that has both a beginning and an end is distasteful to the scientific mind. In a desperate effort to avoid it, some astronomers have searched for other interpretation of the measurements that indicate the retreating motion of the galaxies, and an interpretation that would not require the universe to expand. And the evidence for the expanding universe could be explained away. In other words, if we can look at what we see out here, the evidence we see now, which is an expanding universe, if they could explain that away, then they could, continuing on, the need for a moment of creation would be eliminated, and the concept of the time without end would return to science. But these attempts have not succeeded, and most astronomers have come to the conclusion that they live in an exploding world. In other words, the physical evidence we have is the universe is expanding. So that, looking at the current proper evidence, option 1 isn't it. Okay? we can look at what we see now, when no one was here when it started, but we can look at it now, and we can see, one, it's the universe is expanding, which would point to it started at one point, and two, it's deteriorating, which points to it's going to have an end. So it's, option one's not it. Okay, let's talk about another law. Physical law of science, conservation of mass and conservation of energy. Mass is not, and we're going to get into these again. It was like, oh, I couldn't do that lesson first. You can't do it all first, you know, but we got to talk about it a little bit. Basically, the physical law, conservation of mass, says you can't create something out of nothing. You don't create energy out of nothing. You can have different forms of energy. You have multiple forms of energy, but you know, if you want to make heat, you burn a stick of firewood. You can convert the wood into heat and smoke, you know, the products of combustion. You can change its state, you can change it, but you can't burn nothing. You got to have natural gas, you got to have wood, you got to have something that you're going to start with. And basically, when they say the world caused itself out of nothing, then they're making an argument that is totally outside of the laws, physical laws that we have in this world, in our universe. It's illogical for a scientific mind to come to any other conclusion than option three. And we think about that, we know it's running down, we know it didn't come out of nothing. There's a lot of different theories about, you know, they know that the Big Bang, which would have been option two, the Big Bang has been a problem. And so they have tried to come up with ways to get around the Big Bang. And they get to the point of, they'll say it's tempting to go one step farther. This is by Paul Steinhardt of Princeton. It's tempting to go one step farther and speculate the entire universe evolved from literally nothing. And then you've got other ones, Edward Trine, a professor of physics at City University of New York. I propose that our universe has been created spontaneously from nothing. The proposal struck people as preposterous. And he states, our universe is simply one of those things which happen from time to time. That is not a scientific method, okay? And they know it. So you have these different scientists that have, you know, they just don't want to accept option three, that God created it. So they're like, well, it just happened, okay?
Where did it happen, though, if it's never been there?
And the answer is, Scientific American, I must admit that there are yet no empirical or observational tests that can be used to test the idea of an accidental origin. In other words, the ones that try to look at the science go, there's no evidence that it could have happened and just, created itself. It's outside, others say it's outside of the first law of thermodynamics, which states that neither matter nor energy may be created or destroyed in nature. So they know the Big Bang is not acceptable with the laws of thermodynamics. They know it's not acceptable with the laws of mass and conservation of energy. Some of them may, a guy named Lind wrote in Scientific American, one usually assumes that the current laws of physics did not apply then. So this is kind of like, well, forget the laws that we have, you know.
That's funny because they have to have, they do that theory where you have to prove and prove what
Right. Yeah, it's a theory until you prove it. And so, you know, when we were growing up, they called it the theory of evolution because it's not proven. Now they don't call it a theory anymore. They've kind of got past that. Another one wrote, the current state of knowledge can be summarized thus. In the beginning, there was nothing which exploded.
And these are supposed to be smart men.
These are supposed to, you know, these
The
are
scientists.
scientists, these are, you know, people teaching this stuff. The vast imposing structure organized itself from absolutely nothing. There's not simply difficult to grasp, it's incomprehensible. So some of them are like, so the Big Bang is not it, but they have a problem in that where we get to option 3, it's like we don't want to admit there's a God and that God's the creator. Here's another one, Dr. Hawkins, I forget his first name, but y'all are familiar with the guy, he's like in a wheelchair. Stephen Hawkins. First of all, I will say that at the purely technical level, inflation, as in the universe explained it in itself, does not explain how the universe arose from nothing. Inflation itself takes a very small universe and produces from it a very big universe. But inflation by itself does not explain where that very small universe came from. So Stephen Hawking is like, okay, the Big Bang, well, no, we talk about inflation now. We talk about expanding, but he's like, you still got to have where it starts from.
Well, you know, there's a verse in the Bible that says God takes the wise and makes them foolish. The foolishness of God, you know.
Yes, yes. There are folks, and I mean, the way I would put it is they got nothing. You know, they're like, these are smart guys. They're real smart people. But they're like, well, we just don't want to accept what the Bible tells, so we got to come up with something else.
It's a problem they can't solve.
Right.
I like that T-shirt that says something about the Big Bang Theory. The evolutionist says you get the dirt, and then it says God said, no, you can't use my dirt, or something like that. Get your own dirt.
Right. So you have Michael Turner, University of Chicago, states if inflation is the dynamic behind the Big Bang, we're still looking for the match.
Oh.
So far, unfortunately, the entire grand scheme of eternal inflation does not appear to be open to observational text. There's Philip Morrison, Scientific American, stated, we no longer see a Big Bang as a direct solution. Inflation erases evidence of past space, time, and matter. So they're on this theory of inflation, not so much the theory, you know, the Big Bang doesn't work. It's apparent, go ahead.
What was the name of the guy who started this evolution?
Charles Darwin.
Darwin.
And you know, Darwin was not talking about the creation of the universe. He was talking about man coming from
Monkey.
well, a single
baby
cell
worm.
thing. Yeah. We're going to talk about that some, and they have actually moved on from that theory as well. The sort of the linear, you know, you had a monkey or a gorilla, and then you go on. They've moved on from that theory because that's a problem too. And unfortunately, what I've watched and read about that is it's got worse. Scientifically, it's worse. It's not better. But it's just a matter of... So we look at this and we know, the Bible tells us the universe was created. It came to exist through a divine act. That is the religious view, but it is the only view consistent with the evidence that we have in the world and universe now, which has to align, and it does align with cause and effect. So if we want to take the physical laws of the universe, if you wanted to look at this scientifically, you would come to the conclusion that there was a grand designer. I guess they could still try to say it wasn't God, but that, again, is inconsistent. So any thoughts on the cause and effect of the universe? Okay, let's talk about the great designer. And Genesis chapter 1, we know it's true that everything designed has a designer. That's just by definition. Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So when we look at the creation that we have, the world that we have an extremely fine-tuned universe. And a lot of the evidence here is going to show that if you were just looking for this to happen randomly, it could never have worked out for there to be life. It's a very narrow band of conditions that allow for life. And in fact, you look at the scientists, and even we just launched a new telescope, I think the Webb telescope, and they have for years, they searched for life on other planets. I find it entertaining that we search on Mars, and if we can find a single cell, evidence of a single cell on Mars, we're going to claim that's life. But an unborn baby with a whole nervous system, a heartbeat, the whole thing, well, that's not life. But that single cell would be defined as life when we want it to be. They spend a lot of effort looking, and have for decades, looking for Earth on other planets. And they do it both by looking, this new Webb telescope is going to be looking. They have radio telescopes. They search the entire universe for any pattern of radio waves that would show someone was transmitting something to us. And of course, we've sent out satellites that have, I don't know if satellite's the right term, it doesn't orbit, they send it off, that has messages on it, and always looking for life out there, because I think in their mind, if we can find life on another planet, then that, that's going to open up.
I guess if life is possible on other planets, why would the men and women who travel there have to have so much protection to keep them alive?
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't their life be sustained? I mean, if it sustains life of something else, but yet they have to have everything to keep them contained to be alive.
Right, and God, created this world to keep us alive. God created, it talks about all the stars in the sky. Those stars, one of their things that they try to talk about is, well, given the speed of light, it takes time for light to come. The universe has got to be forever old for the light to have got here, and it's like, do you not understand the power of God? He can create all of the stars out there and the light on its way here. He can create an earth that has a fossil record in the ground. He can create perfection. And so it didn't all have to be created and sit around for millions of years to get here. It can be created as it is. And in fact, that is the case. So we look at, and y'all have all, I'm sure y'all have all heard the different cases about the designer. If one of them is the watch on the beach kind of thing. If you find a watch on the beach, would you assume that the sand just rubbed on each other, and with 1,000,000 years of the sand rubbing on each other, it would make a pocket watch? And the answer is obviously not. That's not things. Again, the physics, the laws of nature are, if you drop your pocket watch on the beach, a week from now, one, it won't work. It will have corroded away. And we know that. So we have a world that's a delicate balance, and it was created, purposely designed, and we can see that in a lot of the details of it. We were meant to be here. God meant for us to be here. It wasn't just like, oh, well, this happened out. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons how this matches up. Okay, so the balance is like the razor's edge for our universe to work. People would look at others, we talked about the watch, but nobody would come along and say Stonehenge. We're familiar with Stonehenge. People are not going to claim that it just happened by accident. Those stones happen to be aligned in this pattern, and time happened and eroded the dirt away and left the stone sticking. No, they know better. People know better. The Bible tells us in the beginning, God. That's the cause. That is the cause that we have. So let's talk about the interaction of the sun and the earth. I know it's on that third page of the handout. So the sun's like a giant nuclear engine. Stuart could probably explain the nuclear engine better than I can. But it gives off more energy in a single second than mankind has produced since the creation.
I know it's fusion, which is something we can't really do, because most nuclear is fission, where it, throws off atoms. And we'd love to be able to come with our own fusion to make energy, because it'd be the way to do it. But again, that's another proof to me of God, to be able to create this giant, like I said, nuclear engine.
Right. And that nuclear engine is powering our Earth from a distance, which is great. It converts 8 million tons of matter into energy every second. Interior temperature of 20 million degrees centigrade. It's real hot. I mean, we recently sent a probe to the sun, and obviously it had to burn up before, I don't know how close it got before it smoked, but I'm sure it didn't get too close. So if you were to move the Earth 10% closer to the sun, 10 million miles, we would get so much more radiation that we would be burned up. Okay, so the radiation from the sun, if you have a source, it drops off, the amount of heat you get drops off with the cube of distance, because the radiation's going in 3 dimensions. So just a small change of distance, and we would be, if we were closer, we'd burned up. If we were 10% farther, we would have too little energy reaching the Earth for us to exist. Our Earth would freeze. It would be doomed for life on Earth. But that's not the only thing. We have an atmosphere. And the atmosphere, if it was not there, the atmosphere stops a lot of the radiation from the sun, the ozone layer. And we've heard about the ozone layer back about, 20 years ago. They talked about the hole in the ozone layer. There's a hole
All the sprays we were using were eating away the ozone layer and all that.
Right, and so there was a hole near Antarctica, and then we quit using different sprays, HCFCs and CFCs, and that hole is gone now. You know, it healed back up. So without the ozone layer, which is like 12 to 18 miles up, we would be fried. Okay, there's another thing, because we would just be fried by the ultraviolet rays. But there are other particles emitted by the sun, the solar wind they call it. And they're like protons and electrons. So it's invisible, but the sun is sending out protons and electrons in all directions. They're coming at extremely high speed, and they're dangerous to people. You can't deal with you'd be radiation poisoned to have protons zapping through your body. It makes little holes, but a lot of little holes is bad for you. Fortunately, we have a magnetic field around the Earth, and the magnetic field deflects the protons and the electrons, and they're reflected off into space. So we have a gigantic magnet. The Earth is a gigantic magnet. Without that, we would be goners. Okay, the Earth spins. Okay, it spins on its axis. It's going approximately 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. We talked about that when we studied Joshua, and the day the Earth stood still. If you just stopped the Earth from spinning just like instantly, everyone at the equator would have been slung off. It would have been bad. So I don't know how that worked out, but it did work out. The sun, okay, we're moving around the sun at 70,000 miles per hour, 19 miles a second. And our solar system, our sun is moving about 600,000 miles per hour in an orbit in the Milky Way. So we're going at extremely high speed. But getting back to the Earth's rotation, the Earth spins every 24 hours. Okay, it gives us night and day, and our light and darkness. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't have Earth. We wouldn't have life here either. Okay, if it just was sitting there, then one side, it's like on the moon, one side of the moon gets baked and the other side's freezing. And there'd be this very narrow band that maybe was temperate enough, but the chance of that working out is not good. If the Earth spun faster, we would have cyclones tearing up the Earth all of the time. So the Earth can't spin faster. It'd be like in a giant food mixer, you know, it just mix things up. If the Earth turned slower, the days would be longer, and so the days would be much hotter and the nights would be much colder. Even that's a problem. Venus turns once every 243 days, which has daytime temperatures as high as 500 degrees Celsius. Of course, that's 5 times the boiling point of water. And part of that is it's closer to the sun, but part of that is it turns slower. So our spin rate is just right, okay, for a daily cycle. But we also have a yearly cycle where we go around the sun in 365 and a quarter days. If we just went around the sun and our axis was straight up and down, that would be a problem. The Earth's spin axis is at 20, what was it? I saw it, it's 20-something degrees.
23.5.
23.5, and that is critical again for the seasons. Not only is that critical, but we don't orbit in a perfect circle, we orbit in an ellipse. And if we didn't do that right, if our year was longer, that would be a problem. If the tilt wasn't right, that would mean the equator would get smoked, and the farther out you got, there'd be this little temperate band instead of the way it works out, where we have it where we can live. Again, another issue with that is the moon. Without the moon, I mean, it's 240,000 miles away, If it was closer, our tides, without the moon, we wouldn't have tides. Without tides, the currents in the ocean let up, the mixing of the ocean, the oceans could be stagnant, and the oceans are critical to our oxygen levels. If it was closer, the tides could be 35 to 50 feet high. So that would mean, you know, your beachfront property is going to be on 5-story high stilts so that you can, you know, go out there. It doesn't work for us. The ocean covers almost 3/4 of the Earth's surface. It's a reservoir for water that moderates our temperatures. If we didn't have that, our temperatures would go up and down too much. But we need a water reservoir too. And we're going to see later about how the Earth's water cycle was talked about in the Bible, long before we knew that it was there. We know that we give off carbon dioxide, we breathe in oxygen. Plants give off oxygen, we take in carbon dioxide. But 90% of the oxygen comes from plants in the ocean. So if the oceans were small, we would probably not have enough oxygen. And then last thing we'll talk about is our atmosphere. 78% nitrogen. I love the places that you go and they'll charge you extra to put nitrogen in your car tires. And you're like, it's already about 80% nitrogen. And according to gas laws, it acts like nitrogen. So you can charge me extra, but it's not really helping much. 21% oxygen. If that level was lower, we'd have a problem. 0.9% argon. The one I love is 0.03% carbon dioxide, and that's before you get the other trace gases. We're trying to change the politics of carbon in the atmosphere, and the way I heard this pointed out, I just got to get on the soapbox a little bit, is if you took a football field, 100 yards long, 78 yards is nitrogen, 21 yards is oxygen. We get to carbon dioxide, which is what we're going to do laws about, and climate change and all of this money, and it's the width of the goal line on a field, football field. And man-made carbon dioxide is only a small portion of that. Man-made carbon in the air is the width of a pencil out of a football field. But obviously, the football field's not the problem. The pencil width is the problem. And in fact, there's a big correlation between water vapor and carbon dioxide, and probably water vapor drives in any varieties in temperature. But that's just me. I think that we're spending a lot of time and effort on something that is not the real problem. It's just a political problem. We do know that without the atmosphere, we'd have too much UV, it scatters light, it acts as a blanket for the solar heat, it keeps the heat in, it protects us from meteorites. You look at pictures of the moon and all the little pot marks, and we have very few. There are pot marks on the Earth. Winslow Meteor crater in Arizona. I don't know if y'all have been there. It's this giant crater, and as they say, it was really lucky because the meteor missed the visitor center by like 50 yards. And I'm joking about that.
I was really impressed when you said that.
I mean, just think of the chance of that happening. No, it's out in the middle of nowhere. And if I remember right, the bottom of the crater could hold like 10 football fields. It's a huge crater. It's an impressive sight to see, but one of those things. And I'll end the statement on the last of that page. Could this all happen by chance? Obviously not. We have an intelligent design. Okay, next week we're going to talk about the human body and the design of the human body.
I have yet to figure out how anyone